the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
And welcome once again to On the Money, your daily weekday dose of economics, business and consumer news. I'm Liam Halligan, and for the next hour, we'll be talking about the basic state pension and the controversial triple lock with people who really know their stuff. But first, it's the GB News headlines with Rosie Wright.
Good afternoon. Let's get you up to date at 1 o'clock. A survivor of child sexual exploitation is calling for the resignations of the Rotherham Council leader and the South Yorkshire Police and Crime Commissioner. It comes after GB News revealed up to 1,600 children may have been at risk of grooming in the borough since 2017. Rotherham Council is meeting this afternoon to discuss child sexual abuse in the town. A survivor who spoke to GB News is demanding action.
It's a despicable behaviour when we're speaking about children being abused. And I think that has come from Councillor Chris Reid and Alan Billings. If they're incapable of protecting the people and the children of this town, they need to do the right thing and walk away.
Well, Dr. Billings said he had invited the survivor to meet police teams working on child sexual exploitation to help them better understand grooming. The leader of Rotherham Council, Chris Reid, says he has the deepest of respect for her and her views. Now, Sir Geoffrey Cox, who's been accused of misusing his office for a second job, says he doesn't believe he's broken parliamentary rules. Labour's called for a standards investigation after an image appeared to show the Tory MP carrying out private work for the British Virgin Islands inquiry in his office. Deputy Labour leader Angela Rayner says the actions seem to be a brazen breach of the rules. Border Force vessels are involved in multiple rescue operations in the English Channel. GB News has been told they're dealing with up to 10 separate incidents. That's after another 10 small boats were intercepted this morning. Yesterday, more than 500 people were found in UK waters. From Monday, people in Wales will need to show a COVID pass to go to the cinema, the theatre and to a concert hall. Protesters have been demonstrating against extended measures. Currently in Wales, you need proof of full vaccination or a negative COVID test result to get into a nightclub or a large event.
I've come to Cardiff today to make my voices heard, to actually have solidarity with people in Wales, to say it's absolutely unacceptable that there should be any vaccine passports. The last vote at the Senate should not have gone through. It was a draw, 28-28. It went through on a technical hitch. Now we're faced with them being extended to different venues across Wales.
The RSPCA has launched an investigation into a video which shows a woman kicking and punching a horse. The charity said it was actively looking into the case, describing the images as upsetting. The primary school teacher, who's reportedly now received death threats since the video was shared online, has been suspended from her job. Poland has sent around 15,000 soldiers to its border with Belarus. The Polish defence minister says more migrants attempted to breach the border overnight. Belarus's leader, Alexander Lukashenko, denies claims he's sending people en masse to Europe in revenge for EU sanctions. The bloc says it's close to imposing further sanctions against the country. Negotiators from nearly 200 countries will scrutinise a first draft of the COP26 agreement, hoping to strike a deal before the summit ends on Friday. The paper was published this morning and it urges nations to revisit and strengthen their emissions targets for 2030 so that global warming is limited to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The Prime Minister is returning to the conference, which is shifting its focus today to transport and low-carbon travel. Sir Elton John has been honoured by the Prince of Wales for his career in music and campaigning work on AIDS. The Rocket Man singer received an Order of the Companions honour, recognising 5 decades spent in the spotlight, plus his action on HIV. Sir David Attenborough and Dame Judi Dench also received the award.
Raring to go, and I've got a lot more work to do as far as my life goes. So this is just a reminder, I think, that there's more to do. More work to do for music, more work to do for charity, and life is great. I'm so lucky.
You are right up to date. I'll bring you the latest headlines in half an hour. Right now, back to Liam and On the Money.
And this is On the Money. The government suspended the so-called triple lock, denying millions of elderly people on the basic state pension around £500 over the coming year. Was this the right thing to do? Plus, each day On the Money features an in-depth Money Talks interview with a business leader, policymaker or someone else with a particularly interesting perspective. Well, today we're talking to Michael Wilson, television's longest-serving business and economics editor and one of Sky Television's founding members. Mike and I will be chewing the rag about his life and career as a financial commentator, a rare chance to catch up with a broadcasting legend. That's later in the show. And as ever, I want your opinions, suggestions, solutions. What do you think of today's debate? This is your show too, so get in touch. Email us, gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet @GBNews. We'll be reading out some of your messages later in the show, so stay with us. This is GB News. I'm Liam Halligan, and you're On the Money. Now, last week, the House of Lords passed an amendment calling on the government to rethink its one-year suspension of the so-called triple lock, designed to maintain the value of the basic state pension. Baroness Ros Altman, a former Tory pensions minister, is heading a campaign in the Lords to push ministers to take account of the financial impact of the pandemic. Yet there are widespread warnings her amendment is all but certain to be overturned by the House of Commons, not least as the triple lock suspension was at the heart of Chancellor Rishi Sunak's October budget statement. The basic state pension triple lock was introduced in 2010 under the coalition government. It means the basic state pension is increased each year by the highest of either inflation or average earnings growth or 2.5%, again, whichever is higher. The problem is that during lockdown, while the elderly, of course, suffered more from the virus itself, those of working age took much of the economic hit. Wages fell sharply during 2020 and this year have partly recovered from that low base. So average earnings growth is up at 8.3% during the year to September. During the budget statement last month, the government confirmed that the basic state pension will be upgraded by 3.1%. That's in line with the September increase in the Consumer Price Index. That's September inflation. That means the basic state pension goes up from £137.60 a week to £141.85. The government argues that that 8.3% wage growth is a statistical anomaly because of the lockdown bounce back, and to increase the basic state pension by that much would be unfair. But it means pensioners stand to lose out approximately £500 a year because that 8.3% wage growth hasn't been reflected. And it means the Treasury saves, by suspending the triple lock for 1 year, about £4.7 billion. Now, with many employees enduring falling incomes during the pandemic, incomes which have yet to recover in some cases, an 8.3% increase in the basic state pension may have been unpopular with some. Ministers have calculated that disappointing pensioners, quite a few of whom are sitting on housing wealth and other savings, is less damaging than upsetting working age voters. But there are over 2 million pensioners in poverty, and soaring inflation means many will struggle to buy the basics. It seems hard to accept that our country can't afford to protect the lowest state pension in the developed world, Baroness Altman has argued, despite many government promises. Does she have a point? Well, in the late 70s, the basic state pension was worth over a quarter of average annual earnings. Now, even with the triple lock in place for 10 years, a decade of rises, the basic state pension is worth less than a fifth of the average wage. As winter approaches, spiralling fuel bills and cost of living rises mean that for many, pensioner poverty will be real. So that's your on the money question today. Was the government right to suspend the pensions triple lock? Well, as regular On the Money viewers know, what we do here on this programme is we stage in-depth conversations with people who really know their stuff. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Sir Steve Webb, who was Pensions Minister of State during David Cameron's coalition government. He is one of the principal architects of the triple lock. We've got Becky O'Connor, who's Head of Pensions and Savings for Interactive Investor. And in the studio, it's friend of the show, the Investment Trust Director and Money Week columnist Max King. Great to see you, Max. Steve Webb, let's start with you. I mean, you must be quite disappointed that Rishi Sunak didn't observe the triple lock. It's been observed every single year since you helped introduce it in 2010-11 in the coalition government. He says an 8.3% wage increase is a statistical anomaly. Isn't he right?
He is right, yes, and I think 8.3 is the wrong answer for this April. I would have been dismayed if they'd said they were scrapping the triple lock for good. I'd have been on the barricades with the pensioners if that's what they'd done. What I was relieved by is they said this is for 1 year only. So you've got this coming April. 8.3% isn't what people are getting in pay rises. People in work aren't getting 8%. So that's the wrong answer. But I also think 3.1% is the wrong answer because, as you just said, Liam, that's September's CPI inflation. By next April, the Bank of England thinks it'll be about 5%. So I think if they're going to link to inflation for 1 year only, it should be the best bet of what inflation next April is going to be, with pensioners spending a lot on fuel bills, council tax bills, food and so on. 5% or something like that would enable pension living standards to be maintained for this one very strange year off the back of COVID before reinstating the triple lock, which I think remains essential for the medium term.
Rebecca O'Connor of Interactive Investor, you're very much from the world of financial markets and private sector pensions, of course, a very important part of the pension provision across our country. But what do you make of this row? We've just heard there from Steve Webb, you know, the architect of the triple lock himself, saying maybe 8.3% would have been wrong, but above average, above inflation increase of 5%, given that inflation was at 3.1% in September, would have been fair. Does that sound right to you?
I think, over 8% was certainly an anomaly, and it was pandemic related. So on that basis, it does make sense to look at whether or not that was the right measure to use. As Steve says, though, it's whether or not the government reintroduces the triple lock at the end of the year, which is really we should be paying attention to, and we need to make sure we hold them to account on that. They've said they're going to reintroduce it, whether they will or not, after having saved quite a lot of money, it has to be said, remains to be seen. So, yes, we needed to look at that anomaly, do something with it, but also, yes, we need to make sure that the benefits for pensioners in the future going forwards are maintained. Because, of course, the whole point is pensioners don't just have the ability to go out and earn more money through a job, the way that younger people in the working population do. That is their income. So in times of really high inflation, as we have now, it's very, very difficult for them to get by.
What do you make of this, Max? You watch government policy very closely. Baroness Ros Altman, she's a very serious person.
Well, so is Steve Webb. I mean, two of the best pension ministers we've ever had.
Absolutely. So where do you fall? They seem to be not arguing. They both want the triple lock, but Ros is insisting this 8.3% increase should be forthcoming in order to maintain the principle.
Well, I can see the reason for maintaining the principle, because if you suspend it once, you can suspend it again.
Yeah.
But I'd have thought the best solution would have been to say, rather than suspend the rule, use a 2-year average. So this year, take the average of the three take the 2-year average of each of the three calculations, see which was highest, deduct last year's, and give that.
Yeah.
I don't know what the number is, but it seems to be that would probably.
It would have been somewhere between 3.1 and 8.3, which is what Steve Webb wants.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I think that would have been a nice, elegant solution, which would have maintained the triple lock whilst not giving 8.3, but giving a reasonably generous increase.
Now, Steve, we're hoping to get Ros on the line. She's just trying to hitch up to our camera system on her computer. But while we've got you here, Steve, tell us about how the triple lock came about. You were literally in the room. You were a pensions minister under David Cameron's coalition government. You, of course, were a distinguished Lib Dem front bench spokesman. That's what the coalition was about. Did you imagine when you were formulating that policy that 10 years later it would be such a massive institutional part of our pension system?
To be honest, I didn't. I mean, I think that the history of it was that the 2.5% floor was to try and avoid the famous, notorious 75p that Gordon Brown once put on the pension. You know, so when inflation and wages are really, really low, pensioners can get pennies, and just politically that's very difficult. So the 2.5% floor was for that. Linked to prices, obviously, to stop pension living standards falling, and linked to earnings to make sure that people are keeping pace with the working pace population. One of the good things, really, is you leave government and you think, well, anything you actually did stand the test of time. And obviously, some other things, auto-enrolment and so on, did, but you wonder whether those other things will be reversed. But actually, what happened with the triple lock is in the 2015 election, every party was committed to it. You know, they could see that this wasn't just a 5-year fix. As you said, Mrs. Thatcher broke the earnings link for 30 years, started a 30-year process of squeeze on the pension, which wasn't going to be reversed in 5. So I think it's really important that this is for the medium term, maybe not forever, but for the medium term, till we get this basic pension up to a higher level. And Liam, if I can just add one thing on what I think Ros would be saying if she could connect with you, is she's not actually calling for this 8.3% as such. She's saying keep an earnings link, but let the statisticians come up with an earnings number that strips out, the COVID effect. So the earnings number might end up being 4 or 5. I think that's what Ros is calling for, rather than just the headline 8.
I think both of you, in different ways, are trying to preserve the principle of the triple lock, aren't you? So this 1-year anomaly, the Chancellor's word, doesn't blow the whole thing out the water. And in fairness to the Chancellor, he has said it is only for 1 year. Rebecca, let's come back to you for now. Tell us about the sort of provision of pensions across the piece, because despite auto-enrolment, another policy which Steve Webb was very heavily involved in introducing and promoting, pension provision in this country is pretty patchy, isn't it? A lot of people will end up relying on the basic state pension, and by international standards, despite 10 years of triple lock related rises, our basic state pension is relatively ungenerous.
Yeah, I mean, a huge number of people already depend on the state pension, and that isn't likely to change in the future. So what we've got happening is a switch over from defined benefit pension schemes, so relatively generous final salary schemes that pay people an income based on their final salary for the rest of their lives, over to defined contribution, which most younger workers are on now through auto-enrolment, where the minimum that you and your employer pays in is 8% of earnings. So whether or not that is going to be enough going forwards to supplement the state pension for people, particularly if that state pension is diminished through measures like adjusting the triple lock, if you put your private pension on top of your state pension, after 8% of contributions through a DC scheme over the years, will that be enough? And we don't necessarily think that it is, actually. We think that people may have to put in more than 8% to come out with a decent private pension through their workplace, saved up through working life, plus the state pension. So there is this dependence on the state pension. It's not going to go anywhere. Young people today who think that this debate about the triple lock is nothing to do with them, actually it is, because they are one day going to rely on that state pension too, or at least it will form a large part of their retirement income. Today's pensioners are a mixed bag. Obviously, you have some people who would be quite happy to do away with the state pension entitlement. They don't feel that they need it. But then at the other end of the spectrum, you have people who really need it, in particular women and people who earned a lower amount throughout their working lives. So absolutely, the picture is very mixed and depend on the type of scheme that you have or had, and the number of years that you were working for your state pension entitlement.
Max, as Rebecca says, it is quite patchy provision. We got the biggest, or one of the biggest, asset management businesses in the world in this country, a huge financial services sector. You used to be a leading figure in that industry of asset management. How have we ended up in a situation where our pension provision is as patchy as it is for so many ordinary people?
Well, we have to remember that actually a number of years ago, we introduced the auto-enrollment Turner pension. And that means that everyone has to invest or put money aside into a top-up private pension.
Which the state matches, almost matches, yeah.
Which means that in time, nobody will be dependent on the state pension because everybody will have a top-up. And that was a wonderful decision for the long term, and assuming that the government don't try and filch all the money and spend it on stupid projects, which they seem to be threatening to do on a regular basis, I think that's going to be a major successful innovation. The problem is that how much do you put into a pension? And the answer is quite simple. The amount you put in depends on the returns you get out of it. The lower the returns you seek, the more you have to put in. And the reason why some of the defined benefit pension schemes like University Superannuation Scheme are in such crisis is because they've decided in the future they're going to be able to only earn derisory returns. So they want more and more money to go into it. Now, 8% might be enough if you get the right returns. And if you invest for the long term, putting 8%, well, I would say it's a bit tight, but 8% with the benefit also of the top-up with the basic state pension, I thought that would be perfect enough. But you have to get the right returns out of your pensions, otherwise you're in trouble.
But a lot of pension managers are not forced, but certainly browbeaten by the regulators to put money into government bonds, which return derisory amounts of money, less than the rate of inflation.
Well, people are pretty negligent about what their pension funds are doing, and you want to check that if you're a member of a big pension scheme which is ploughing money into government bonds, move out and get your own pension, your own SIP, which is far, far more flexible. And thanks to the innovation, the pension freedoms which Steve Webb introduced, when was it, 7 or 8 years ago, I mean, the system massively there are massive advantages to doing that.
We're going to carry on this discussion after the break. You're watching On the Money with me, Liam Halligan. We've got pensions and savings expert Rebecca O'Connor. We've got the economist Max King. We've got Sir Steve Webb, who invented the triple lock, and that's what we're discussing. Your emails are flooding in thick and fast. We'll be reading out some of those, so stay with us. You're On the Money.
Hello again. Something of a north-south split with the weather today. Brighter skies across the north with some sunshine, much of the south fairly drab with outbreaks of rain and drizzle for some as well. That's being caused by this rippling, wiggling weather fronts that's kind of grinding to a halt through the rest of today over the Midlands, parts of South Wales and East Anglia. So some outbreaks of rain likely here. The far southeast may see a little bit of brightness, but much of the southern half of the UK covered in cloud. Brighter skies for northern England, southern Scotland, Northern Ireland. In the far northwest, though, it is windy, and there will be a few showers coming in here, particularly over the Highlands. Temperatures across the north, 10, 11 at best with a bit of sunshine. It is pretty mild further south, 15, 16 in the London area, but it doesn't feel all that mild if you're stuck under that weather front and the cloud, rain and drizzle, which will continue on and off through the evening to push into parts of East Anglia, maybe down towards the southeast before tending to fizzle out. Another band of showery rain across northern Scotland. Otherwise largely dry, and some fog is likely. It could be quite thick through the early hours over parts of northern England, North Wales, southern Scotland, where things will turn quite chilly. Again, it will stay pretty mild overnight across the south. So another mild day here. Again, predominantly cloudy across the south. There'll be the odd shower coming into North Wales later, maybe southwest Scotland, northwest England, but some brightness likely across eastern areas. A bit of sunshine, but generally fairly cloudy. The breeze starting to strengthen, and notice behind me there are further bands of rain. That's tied into an area of low pressure that's going to bring more persistent rain across the country during Thursday evening and into Friday, and it will increase the winds as well. So that area of low pressure really will dominate from Thursday night onwards, bringing, as I say, a spell of wet and windy weather for most, coming in and then kind of fizzling out. So it turns drier through Saturday, and at the moment Sunday looks dry for much of the UK. Bye for now.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. You're watching On the Money with me, Liam Halligan. We're discussing were ministers right to suspend for 1 year that triple lock on the basic state pension, a move by Chancellor Rishi Sunak which is denying pensioners on that basic state pension around £500 a year. Well, I'm delighted we're now joined by Baroness Ros Altman, who, of course, was the person who moved the amendment challenging the government suspension in the Lords last week. Ros, great to see you. I know we're having comms issues here, the House of Lords, Wi-Fi's, GCHQ's in a spin and all the rest of it. We do have you now. Ros, what would you say to government ministers who are planning to overturn the amendment that you moved in the Lords when it returns to the Commons?
What I would say, Liam, is don't do it. Honour your commitment to pensioners. Recognise that there are millions of pensioners who rely only on the basic state pension. And if you think doing it just for 1 year isn't a problem, what a year to do it. What are they supposed to live on? These poorest pensioners don't have money stashed down the back of their sofa that they can call on to meet their fuel bills, You know, we are one of the richest countries in the world with the lowest state pension in the developed world. And are we really saying that we can't afford to honour a few pounds a week increase that we promised to our pensioners in 2019?
Ros, we've got an all-star panel today, as well as your good self. We've also got Sir Steve Webb on our panel. Steve says that he accepts that 8.3 is a lot, but maybe it should have been an above-inflation increase and not the 3.1% ministers have promised off the back of the September inflation number, maybe 5%. What's your precise position?
Well, exactly what I have recommended is what was already in the legislation that the government is trying to force people to amend, which is that the Secretary of State can adjust the earnings number for the pandemic next year. You know, clearly the 8.3% was artificially high because of the end of furlough and other various measures. There was a base effect and a composition effect, which distorted the numbers. But it's clear that using just the September CPI number of 3.1% is too low. And in fact, the September inflation figure was downwardly biased by the pandemic measures last year too. Now, if we are a country that honours its commitments, if we can be trusted, and I hope politicians will see that there may be a slight need to restore some trust and confidence at the moment, then what the honourable thing to do would be is to basically adjust the earnings number, which is what legislation requires the state pension to be increased by, to take account of the pandemic. Now, the government's argument is that it can't figure out a new number, so it's just going to scrap the earnings link. Well, I'm sorry, but it strains credulity to believe that with its array of statisticians, mathematicians, and actuaries, that the government cannot come up with a reasonable number that adjusts it. But if it really is struggling, then the OBR and the ONS have both produced estimates which are pretty well above 3.1%, but below the 8.3%. And that's what should be used. That's the decent and honourable thing to do. We have pensioner poverty. 2 million pensioners in this country are living in poverty. That number was already rising before the pandemic. In the middle of a cost of living crisis, how can we justify the Chancellor's decision at the budget to take £5 billion away from pensioners next year and give at least half of that to banks in lower taxes and to pay for lower alcohol duties and lower duties for internal flights? What kind of values does our country hold dear?
Let's just get some response to that, Ros. Max, we've got Ros Altman, we've got Sir Steve Webb, two of the sort of leading pensions experts who are in public life. They're both putting pressure on Rishi Sunak. But politics is a tough business, isn't it? Are you surprised this triple lock has lasted 10 years?
No, I'm not. I think it should have lasted. And they, as Ros says, they could adjust the earnings numbers, and I suggested adjusting the earnings numbers by just averaging over two years. And I think and I think that works perfectly well, and it maintains the triple lock. The trouble is, once you break the triple lock once, you can break it again, and probably will be broken again. And what we're seeing on a sort of week by week, month by month, year by year basis is continual pressure probably by the civil service to undermine the pension reforms which Steve Webb brought in nearly 10 years ago. And what we've done is we've reduced the visibility. We seem to be reducing the visibility of pensions. People should be able to make long-term pension decisions based on unchanging rules over many years. They shouldn't have to read the papers every couple of months and find that somebody is suggesting some new whiz-bang way of squeezing pensioners.
Steve Webb, the government has building up a bit of a track record of U-turns, not least in this latest lobbying round. Do you think there's a hope that you can? It's not ordinary for the House of Lords to force the government to reverse any aspect of its budget. It's the tradition, the convention is that financial bills, particularly the budget bill, are challenged but aren't reversed by the Lords. Could there be an exception here? I mean, there's a head of steam here. There's you, there's Ros Altman, there's Max King. It's a pretty wide constituency represented by the three of you.
Yeah, well, I'm delighted that Ros, with all party support, I would say, across the House of Lords, is challenging this. I think Ros may not have been connected when we commented earlier that I think the 3.1% is just too low. Think about the October the 1st energy price cap increase of 12% or whatever the figure. That's not counted because it was the September CPI. So we definitely need more than that. Ros has suggested a sort of underlying earnings figure, which the statisticians think might be, let's say, 4.5-ish. I've suggested next April's inflation, which the bank thinks will be 5. So, I mean, I think we're talking about the same sort of number. Politically, the government have already tabled a response saying go away to the House of Lords. They will win that vote. There's not a shadow of a doubt that they'll win that vote in the Commons. They've got the numbers for it. It'll come back to the Lords. And I hope that the Lords, Ros is not famous for rolling over and giving in on these kind of things. So I hope that they'll keep up the challenge because 3.1% just isn't fair. And it's no good to say to pensioners, give it another year and it'll all catch up. The inflation that happened after September will come through the following year. They've got a year's worth of fuel bills to pay, a year's worth of council tax bills to pay. So, more power to their lordship's elbows.
You know what, Steve? You know Parliament better than I do, but this could be a thing. I mean, it'll only take 40 Tory MPs to change their mind and listen to Ros Altman. There's enormous respect for her across both Houses of Parliament. She won't mind me saying, despite her natural modesty, I think the government could have a bit of a problem here.
I think you'd like to think so. The only catch is this. You have to remember, this legislation's been through the House of Commons already. It's not that they haven't had a chance to debate this. So the MPs have rubber stamped this once. Now, I hope they'll listen to fresh arguments, but the government's precious about budgets, about the House of Lords' role in these things. So I think there's no chance of a defeat in the Commons this time round. But as I say, good luck to Ros and her colleagues in challenging them.
Rebecca O'Connor, what do you think? Do you think if there is a parliamentary reversal here, what would the financial services industry think of that? What would the city think?
That's a good question. So, what would the city think? I think that the city is probably fairly agnostic on the triple lock. It is a decision for ministers and for the government, and it is about protecting pensioner income, not just now, but in the future. And I think we can all see the economic benefits of looking after. I mean, it's about looking after some of the poorest members of society, I think the city would want that too, if I can speak for the city on state pension benefits.
Well, look, it's been a fabulous discussion. I actually sense some movement here. I hope I'm not jumping the gun here. I think the coalition, the intellectual coalition, Steve, of you and Ros is pretty formidable. I think a lot of journalists will notice that both of you're not saying 8.3%, but you're saying more than 3.1%. I think we could be hearing a lot more of this. So Steve Webb, Baroness Ros Altman, of course, Becky O'Connor, the interactive investor, and of course, friend of the show, Max King in the studio. Thank you to all my guests today. You're watching On the Money with me, Liam Halligan. Coming up on today's Money Talks, our in-depth interview feature. It's a man whose media career spans 40 years. It's Sky's former finance commentator, Michael Wilson. He joins us to speak about reporting on the booms and the busts of the business world. But before that, here's your GB News update with Rosie Wright.
Let's get you up to date at 1:30. A survivor of child sexual exploitation is calling for the resignations of the Rotherham Council leader and the South Yorkshire Police and Crime Commissioner. It comes after GB News revealed up to 1,600 risk assessments have been carried out on children who were considered to be vulnerable to grooming in the borough since 2017. Sir Geoffrey Cox says he doesn't believe he's broken any parliamentary rules after he was accused of using his MP office to carry out private work for the British Virgin Islands inquiry. Labour is calling for a standards investigation, with the Deputy Leader, Angela Rayner, saying his actions appear to be a brazen breach of the rules. Negotiators from nearly 200 countries are scrutinising a first draft of the COP26 agreement, hoping to strike a deal before the summit ends on Friday. The paper, published this morning, urges nations to revisit and strengthen their emissions targets for 2030 so that global warming is limited to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The Prime Minister has returned to the conference this afternoon. From Monday, people in Wales have to show their COVID passes to go to the cinema, to the theatre or a concert hall. Currently, proof of full vaccination or a negative test is only needed for nightclubs and large events. Protesters have been demonstrating against the extended measures. Sir Elton John has been honoured by the Prince of Wales for his career in music and campaigning work on AIDS. The musician received an Order of the Companions of Honour, recognising 5 decades in the spotlight, as well as his action on HIV. Sir David Attenborough and Dame Judi Dench have also received the award. You are up to date. I'll have more on all of today's top stories at 2 o'clock.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back, you're on the money. Time now for my daily interview series. Here it is, it's Money Talks. Now, today's guest is someone I hold in high esteem, a fellow broadcaster I truly admire. It's Mike Wilson, television's longest-serving business and economics editor. Michael's broadcasting career began at Thames Television in the late 1970s, when I was at primary school. And Michael then joined Sky as business editor during the channel's inception in the late 1980s. For the next 20 years and more, Michael's at the forefront of TV business and economics coverage, anchoring major events such as the fall of the Berlin Wall, all the way through to the 2008 financial crisis and beyond. Since leaving Sky, Mike's been in demand, having presented shows for the BBC, ITV and LBC. He remains one of the UK's most influential and talented, if I may say so, business broadcasters.
You may say that.
Michael, it's great to have you in the studio. This is partly sort of 2 media lovies talking to each other. I feel like I'm interviewing Michael Wilson's Poppy, but that's fine. Did you knit that yourself?
Came from Devon, actually. It's handmade, as you can tell. It may be a bit droopy. That's only because of the rain.
But we have talked over the years, as friends, as broadcasting colleagues, about the importance of economics and business coverage on television, not just to sort of try and promote the employment of ourselves, because both of us, we think it's very, very important, and we think it's not as good as when we were kids.
No, I think the difference nowadays is I can remember the time when business stories came from the back pages of the newspaper, you know, onto the front pages, and that was a lot to do with the financial crash in 1987, which of course turns out to be nothing really.
Yeah.
The big financial crisis, I think, 2008 was very, very important indeed. You mentioned the fall of the Berlin Wall, that changed everybody. Never mind the terrorist attacks in New York, terrible as they were. Those are big news stories. But you're absolutely right. People these days have got so much to think about, haven't they? It's really, really difficult. And I'm not just talking about, you know, the likes of the domestic worries that people have and the cost of living. Politicians as well have never, ever been down this path before. They've never seen this before.
That's right. I must say, when I was a kid, I was inspired by, I'd watched the Money programme. My dad was an Irish builder. He started a little business. What happened to the economy really affected the mood in our household.
Yeah.
And television reflected that. And even when I came into journalism later than you in the mid-90s, there were a lot more people around who were really knowledgeable about business and economics than there are now.
Yeah, I think there are. What did it for me as a journalist to go into this side of things was that I you know, started, as we all do, in local news, and I was interviewing politicians, and I thought these are babies, basically, even then. It was only when I went to the city, and whether you like it or not, there's crooks there, and there's good people there, and all the rest of it, when I was seeing people actually being able to say something, you know, if X happens, then Y will happen, and all these kind of, you know, causal effects of things, I thought that was rather impressive, and I rather liked it. And from then on, it just became a fascinating world to have a look at. And generally speaking, I mean, when Sky started in '89, I was pushing at an open door, basically, because they wanted business coverage. They didn't really know why they wanted it. Nobody really knows why we do the Scottish football results, apart from people who live in Scotland, you know, in Montrose and Motherwell and so on. But we do. But this was actually quite important. They put a lot of money behind. We, in fact, went to Fox at one stage in New York to help them start their coverage. Financial Times, television, you know, need I go on? There was loads of them. Everybody wanted to get in. What we learnt was that there's no point in doing anything unless you're a television company, first of all. And, you know, because television newspapers don't really work. My ambition, like you started life on the F2, that was my ambition at that time, to work on the FT. Industrial editor, that would have done me at the time.
It strikes me that we're similar broadcasters in the sense that we're not going to sit here and it's not like a sort of money channel. We're not going to tell you what stocks and shares to buy. We're both interested, I think, in ordinary people just understanding more about this seemingly very complex but massively important world of economics and business. It is about the economy, stupid, isn't it? It drives everything.
Of course it does. And I used to get very, very angry with people who would stand in front of a graphic and say, you know, the FTSE's gone up 50 points. So what? You know, the question is why? What can you explain about this? And does it in fact matter? Of course, the FTSE 100 doesn't matter as far as the UK is concerned. We both know that. But to explain those,
it's all foreign companies mainly, isn't it?
Correct. Yeah. So to explain those kind of things to people, it takes. And I'm not being big-headed about this, and I'm sure you wouldn't either. But to make things simple is really, really difficult. And that's why I admire some of our colleagues who worked on the red tops, for example. The
tabloid papers,
we're talking about, who had to simplify things and put headlines. To a lot of people looking from the outside, it's very snobbily said, no, you shouldn't be doing that. It should get more complicated. Rubbish. Things should be explained in a simple kind of way. It takes a particular kind of brain to be able to do that, doesn't it?
Well, I'm lucky enough, and I worked hard enough to work on, some of the leading broadsheet papers in this country, not least the Financial Times. I also write regularly for The Sun, and you know what? I've got to be on much better form to write for The Sun.
You do.
Because unless the copy is absolutely crystal clear and pings off the page, it ain't going to get through the famous backbench. The subs are going to say, I don't understand this.
Of course, and I would just add, if I made the Daily Mail to that as well.
I
think they do a similar kind of thing.
They do.
You might not like the politics, or maybe you do,
but
maybe
the
you
business
don't.
coverage is second.
Absolutely.
Is second
and it's precisely because of that reason. It's there. And if I occasionally had the privilege of training younger journalists when I was working at Sky and in later life as well. And I used to say to them, if you can write like that, then that's your benchmark. Then start to broadcast. It's very important.
Yeah. It seems to me that we're both avid readers of the press. The press isn't covering business the way it used to. A lot of the broadsheets, not mentioning any names, they seem to have almost given up on business. There are certain Sunday papers, they have no business sections anymore. My own paper, The Telegraph, still has a very chunky, very well-respected business section every day of the week, including Sunday. The Sunday Times does as well. But it strikes me that as the media margins have been squeezed, Google and Facebook take a lot of the money away from it, a lot of the resources from it. There aren't as many journalists as there used to be. it seems to me that business and economics coverage has been in the front line for those cuts. It is quite expensive coverage, but I would say it's vital, more important than endless political knockabout.
Yeah, absolutely it is. I would add something else to that as well. I get most of my stuff online, basically, from online reports. Not from social media, but from online editions of newspapers around the world, which I find give me much more meat, to get my teeth into, rather than just reading newspapers. I think newspapers do reasonably well. What people don't understand in this country is how expensive news gathering actually is. It's extraordinarily expensive.
Absolutely. What would you say to those who say, oh, business is boring, business isn't for me, there's no reason I should be interested in business, the economy is just loads of old blokes in suits talking in a complex way?
In my own business, I was said, great, you keep thinking that, no problem at all, because I'll still have a job. And as far as the general public's concerned, I think that, yes, there certainly is that. And yet you get in a taxi in London, you get in a taxi in Manchester, you get in Uber. Who's talking about business? Who's talking about money?
Everyone.
Everyone. They are.
I get stopped in the street a lot, and I'm sure you do too, just ordinary people saying, oh, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? I might have to fix my mortgage. My kids want to buy a house. What do you think? We're not saying buy this company or that company on the stock exchange. It's just general views about the big trends.
I'm seeing more and more, and when I'm doing GB News and other things as well, I'm saying, like it or not, interest rates are going up, and you really, really do need to think about this, because it'll only seem like a little amount, but it doesn't take a big amount, does it, to double the cost of borrowing as we speak. That's the big danger. That's what's happening, and we are going to have to pay for this pandemic at some stage. Those are the broader pictures. That's why it's important that people understand the cost of living going up as well.
It strikes me, I mean, my family's only been in this country for one generation. We came from the west of Ireland, of course. It strikes me that the British, and the English in particular, they have a bit of a problem talking about money. It's like a taboo subject. In America, it's like, hey, man, what do you earn? What car do you drive? In England, it's always, oh, don't talk about money. Why is that?
It's a generational thing. I have no idea. When you used to go to the States, you could stop anybody and you get a soundbite, wouldn't you?
That's right. That's right.
They just made for soundbites. It doesn't matter what nationality they are, no matter what their background is. They're made for soundbites. Similarly with money as well. I think the mindset there is to say, I want that. And this is how I'm going to get it, not he's got that. So it's like let the Rolls Royce pass by. No, I'll have one of those. Thank you very much indeed.
And the mindset there is to start a business, even if you fail, you had to go
learn from failure.
Come again. Absolutely, in this country, there seems to be a fear of public failure, so people don't. I mean, we are very, very entrepreneurial, but I think we could be a lot more dynamic than we are.
I do too. If there was somebody, at first, I think it starts at school. I think you have to learn from failure, not necessarily at school, but if you're starting your own business, if it goes wrong, and it will go wrong, as all businesses do, at one way, why did that happen? What can I actually learn from that? What can I take? And it takes quite a mind to do that, doesn't it?
It was great to have you as part of our budget coverage at the end of last month, our first ever GB News budget, and you were part of our panel looking at reading the runes. A couple of weeks on, what do you think of what Rishi Sunak did? Was it a Conservative budget, Michael?
No, of course it wasn't. It was a necessary budget, and I think you can take away those labels right now. We're all in this together. It's going to cost a great deal of money. If you think the government should be supporting businesses and should be supporting you and people in the street, then fair enough. No, I think that what happened with him was he couldn't go any other way. It didn't really surprise me as to what was actually said. I can't even remember the detail of it right now, because I'm looking ahead to the next big thing, and the next big thing is going to be an interest rate rise in this country. That is the absolute bottom line, and that's going to happen sooner rather than later. You see today, for example, or rather yesterday, one of the Fed presidents was saying, a couple of interest rate rises in 2022.
That's the US Central Bank.
Yes, indeed. And whether that happens here towards the end of the year, maybe the beginning of next, we'll see. But that's going to be fairly crucial. This is going to be a very, very hard road.
You and I used to see a lot of each other at the London Stock Exchange when you were presenting a daily programme for Sky, and I was doing something similar for a while for Channel 4 News, a lunchtime programme, as was. And that was the height of New Labour. That was when Gordon Brown was, he couldn't be challenged within government. He was the Iron Chancellor, doing a pretty decent job, really, of putting to rest the ghosts of Labour's past, the ghosts that we grew up with of, the IMF crisis and incompetence and Labour financial mismanagement. Do you see any sense as an observer observer of politics, that Labour is rebuilding that credibility, can actually convey to the electorate we can be trusted on the economy?
I think that during that time, when we were working at the Stock Exchange, I think a minister from the Labour government actually came to the Stock Exchange and asked to be shown the trading floor. That was what they knew about the cost of bottom one, wasn't it? Because that passed, you know, and all this. I don't think they have. I think the stock exchange is one of those things that's actually shrinking and shrinking, and I think more of that business will go abroad. I don't think Labour are really across it. No, I still feel that, you know, if you're going to let money escape, then stick Labour on it, because that's what will happen. I don't feel as though they've got a grip right now. No, I don't.
What do you think we can do as broadcasters to do better in terms of what we offer the British public? Can we return to the heyday of our youth? Was it a heyday when we had the Money programme, when we had newspapers that were absolutely chock full of business and economic commentary?
I think we can. I think we just have to go back to those kind of days. It's a question of informing the backroom people, isn't it?
That's right.
The editorial team,
yeah,
wherever you are,
that's
and
right.
saying this is important. This is about Mr. and Mrs. So and so. If everything has a human interest behind it, never mind about the companies, never mind about the FTSE, never mind about, you know, General Electric splitting into three as we, you know, who cares, right? If it's about cost of living, and it's about people starting their own businesses and feeling entrepreneurial and feeling proud of what they do. Sorry to sound a bit sort of, you know, about like that, you know exactly what I'm talking about. No, but I think there is. I think there's a certain amount of pride that people have in getting involved in business, and they need to know. There's plenty of information available. There's plenty of noise. Yeah. Not enough news.
Not enough guidance. Do you think, here's a question, do you think Boris Johnson is interested in economics? He's interested in the economy. He's interested in announcing or pushing his Chancellor to announce big spending rises. But do you think he actually gets economics?
OK.
Steady.
That's a big one. OK. I think he's a bit like Reagan used to be. And I admire
Ronald Reagan, the US president in the 80s.
Indeed.
Very successful president.
Very successful. Why was he successful? Not because he knew a lot, but he had people around him who knew a lot and knew how to delegate. I think, I'm not a political expert, but I think that's what Boris Johnson does. And I think if I were in that job, that's what I would do as well. I'm not interested in the small detail. Fix me this, fix me that, bring me it when you fix it, but that's the general direction in which we're going.
What do you make of the Bank of England governor? He's being accused of the Grand Old Duke of York marching the financial markets up. There's an interest rate rise coming, and then the interest rate rise didn't happen.
You were in here on Thursday. You were expecting an interest rate rise, weren't you, like the rest of us? I mean,
Well, I predicted there wouldn't be one, but I could see the financial markets, they'd priced it in.
They not only had they priced it in, but in this sort of nudge and wink game that goes on, they felt that's exactly what was going to happen. I do feel he's behind the curve. I wouldn't envy any of the central bankers their jobs right now, particularly in the United States. Jay Powell may get replaced, may not, by a female economist, and good luck as well. That's, you know, that'd be a nice kind of change. Here, I do feel as though the Bank of England is behind the curve, and as we both know in the past, we've looked at it very closely indeed, haven't we, on those MPC meetings.
It's worth explaining, isn't it, Mike, that why might the Bank of England want the markets to think that an interest rate rise is coming? Because if they think an interest rate rise is coming, the pound goes up, all other things being equal. That means imports are cheaper, so that keeps a lid on inflation. So there is some logic in, you know, signalling there's going to be a rate rise, even if there isn't. But you can only do that once or twice, can't you? Because then people don't believe you anymore.
It's the unreliable boyfriend.
The unreliable boyfriend, which Mark Carney was accused of doing the same.
It's all that stuff. I'd be very surprised if they really think that's what they're achieving by keeping the pound high, keeping inflation down, because it makes imports cheaper. I'd be surprised. I mean, I'd be happy if they did think that. I just don't think they do. I think what's happening is the governor says one thing, and then the committee all sits around. And remember, I think the Bank of England is no bad thermometer of what's actually going on. They do have agents around the country that report into them.
One sentence answer. You have no formal training in economics, and yet you speak beautifully and fluently about the economy. What would you say to those who say economics is scary?
It begins with B and ends in S, but no. I mean,
got two L's in the middle.
Sort of, yeah. No. I think read about it and just absorb it and don't worry about it, and do understand that nobody is an expert.
Michael Wilson, business broadcasting legend. An honour to have you on the show. You've been watching On the Money with me, Liam Halligan. Every weekday at 1 p.m, we bring you your daily dose of economic, business and consumer news. Thanks for joining me today. See you at 1 p.m. tomorrow, where we'll be discussing the GDP figures. I'm Liam Halligan. This is GB News, and that was On the Money.
Hello again. Something of a north-south split with the weather today. Brighter skies across the north with some sunshine, much of the south fairly drab with outbreaks of rain and drizzle for some as well. That's being caused by this rippling, wiggling weather fronts that's kind of grinding to a halt through the rest of today over the Midlands, parts of South Wales and East Anglia. So some outbreaks of rain likely here. The far southeast may see a little bit of brightness, but much of the southern half of the UK covered in cloud. Brighter skies for northern England, southern Scotland, Northern Ireland. In the far northwest, though, it is windy and there will be a few showers coming in here, particularly over the Highlands. Temperatures across the north, 10, 11 at best with a bit of sunshine. It is pretty mild further south. 15, 16 in the London area, but it doesn't feel all that mild if you're stuck under that weather front and the cloud, rain and drizzle, which will continue on and off through the evening to push into parts of East Anglia, maybe down towards the southeast before tending to fizzle out. Another band of showery rain across northern Scotland. Otherwise largely dry, and some fog is likely. It could be quite thick through the early hours over parts of northern England, North Wales, southern Scotland, where things will turn quite chilly. Again, it will stay pretty mild overnight across the south. So another mild day here. Again,